This session is being hosted by Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, which is a coalition, largest coalition ever formed in this country, set up in 2006, and has attempted to bring as many people together around the issue of climate change who wish to be involved. Represents most environment charities, humanitarian charities, a lot of church groups, unions, and health charities and all sorts, community groups and everything else in between. So, and it's absolutely vital that we do represent that breadth and try to be as broad as possible, in part because I always think it's quite funny, actually. I've worked in a lot of areas where campaigning is a dirty word, so it's definitely seen as quite a negative thing in a lot of spaces. It's just, campaigning is just lobbying without money, and if you work for charities, we all do that, don't we? Today we're being joined by three other speakers, so I'll do a little introduction, they will then all have a little turn to tell you their perspectives, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A panel. So you may know some of the panel. Richard Dixon at the end is previous CEO of WWF Scotland and Friends of the Earth, and is a consultant who has helped put the manifesto together that the Climate Change Coalition has produced recently. Talat Yaqub is a campaigns and communications expert, and Lily Renault is a young climate justice activist. So you're going to hear from all of them very briefly, but you have to put up with me first. So why have we produced a climate manifesto, which is really what we're going to talk about today? Obviously, there's a period right now, there's a climate change plan for Scotland being discussed. It's a refresh to the previous climate change plans. This is technically the fourth, and it's there to try to hit the emissions targets that were set in 2019. It's slow progress, it's laborious, it's not sure, none of us are sure we're being listened to very carefully, but it's very time consuming and very complicated. And I guess one of the things that I'd like to start with is just how blooming time consuming and complicated campaigning is at the moment in the third sector. Back in 2019, the sort of height of the school strikes, there was a really tremendous headline in the Herald. It was two photographs. One was loads of young people campaigning for a brighter future through climate justice, marching through the middle of Glasgow, of course, it was the Herald. And the other picture was a picture of several people beating each other up over a sectarian riot. And the front banner headline was, "Which Scotland do you want to live in?" And I thought it was actually a brilliant piece of journalism. And I have to say, it's important to remember, you know, we are all very nervous and conscious as charities that we always have to stay the right side of politics. We've got to be careful not to be seen to be overtly political. And with an upcoming election, that's even more critical. But equally, I would just caution that we must not let go of the science or the ethics or the morality. So it's one thing to be politically impartial, but we mustn't be morally or ethically impartial. If people are doing things that are anti-scientific, they need to be called out, and we should be bold about that. Anyway, on with sort of where we got to. So back in 2019, huge energy and emotion and profile for climate activity. And then COVID hit and everybody just sort of, well, I don't know what did happen for the last 3 odd years. We lost a lot of political will, we lost a lot of momentum. It was more difficult to organise and do all of those things. And actually the 2030 targets, which were set in 2019, are already being talked about as if they're a pipe dream and difficult to achieve. Almost as if we've run out of money and oops, never mind, sorry, we didn't have enough money to deal with it. So there's some really big issues and some big battles to be had. I think the other change is a lot of the detail that's we're now getting into, which is some of the solutions to deliver against sectoral targets, are being sort of opposed at every point. And we've got to be really careful about how we tackle that and creating the political room to allow them. There's battles on many fronts, from climate justice, renewables, transport, housing, buildings, heat, agriculture, loss and damage on the international stage, just transition, and of course, and especially today, although it seems to be every day at the moment, even more oil and gas licenses and how we deal with that. There are so many layers to work on at once. There's the international dimension, the national dimension, the regional and the local dimensions as well. So not perhaps surprisingly in a sector starved of resources, it felt pretty overwhelming. And I think all of us have probably experienced that knackeredness of chasing and trying to respond and react, along with a sort of frustration in doing so. And in a way, I think a lot of people have run out of steam, and it was really important and they were struggling to be heard, and really important that they should be. So what we've tried to do with the coalition is just pause and breathe and step back and just take some time. What do we actually all agree on? What do we think needs to happen? What are we pretty sure needs to happen? Let's stop chasing our tails and reacting to other people's agendas and start writing the agenda again, start driving the agenda again. Get on the front foot. We know we need to deliver targets, and that's not going to go away, and it's not going to come easily. We need finance to support that. There's no money for any of this, really. And if we don't address that, we're probably not going to address the issue. So hence, we produced a fiscal levers paper and continuing to do work around how we generate the money. We need clarity and bold ideas. We need to know where we agree, and we need to be pushing hard for that. We need to empower all the different NGOs out there. Instead of duplicating efforts by responding to consultations, let's specialise, let's help, let's empower each of the individual organisations to take a lead in each different space and throw the weight of our community behind them so they're listened to properly at the table. And ultimately, I think we really need to win the public space for change. The one thing that we absolutely can do is when things like deposit return schemes hit the news, low emission zones, again, the Herald, more rats in Glasgow since low emission zones started. What a lot of nonsense. What was that, written by an 8-year-old? But the reality is we haven't created the public space for that to be, when that's rolled out, people should be willing and looking for it and excited about it instead of affronted by it and opposing it. And so we as a sector have more to do. And the only way we can do that is to be a lot more joined up, a lot more coordinated. And that's why, even though we sit on the Climate Change Plan Advisory Group, we sort of went off and wrote our own. So that's what you're going to hear about today.
Scotland has been a climate leader. We have acknowledged officially in our politics that there is a climate emergency. We did that some years ago. We have 2 climate acts. We have comparatively ambitious climate targets that we've set. And we've called this decade, the 2020s, the decade of delivery on climate change. We've also been good in the international arena. So even though we're a small country, we've championed international action. We've put money into climate action in some African countries. And we've spoken vocally and put money into the difficult issue of loss and damage, which is a difficult international discussion that rich nations don't really want to go anywhere. Poor nations think it's essential for them. Scotland's played a very honourable role there. And what does that mean at home? Well, these are our emissions since 1990, which is when the Climate Act set the targets from. You can see that our emissions in the last year that we measured are 50% below where we started. And we have targets for a 75% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2045, 5 years ahead of the UK. But on too many fronts, we are not delivering. So we're missing our annual targets in the Climate Acts. The government's own monitoring shows that we're off track for the 2030 and 2045 targets. We need to do much more to get back on track. And emissions from agriculture, from homes, from business, apart from steel, and from transport are pretty much what they were 30 years ago. So we've done the easy things, kind of easy things, transforming the energy sector, getting rid of some of the big industries, done something on home insulation, going in the right direction, but slowly. But we have so much more to do. So that's partly why we created the manifesto. So Mike has waved the manifesto. It's very nice to have a read. But you can also go to the website and look at it, and you can search it. So if you want to know about policies which are aimed at the Scottish Government about transport, which will bring about behaviour change, you can filter it to show those policies only. So it's a really good resource to find policies on pretty much anything in the big sectors. So in putting these policies together, because you could do this in a number of different ways, we have adopted some principles to get the right policies in the right way in here. So one of those is not an eco-fascist approach, not a market approach, but where possible, a community approach. So decisions about low carbon are made locally. And there's local ownership of things like renewable energy, bus companies, transport systems, where that's possible. Just transition is another principle that runs through very clearly in here. We need no worker, no community left behind as we move from our moderately high carbon economy to a zero carbon economy. So I'm going to very quickly run through some of the policies in there, just a small selection to give you a flavour of what's in there, and I encourage you to get a copy of the document or go to the website. So the first one on cross-cutting things is, of course, to actually deliver on the stuff we've already promised to do. So the current climate plan is going off track. And so we need to make sure we deliver on the stuff that's in there, as well as adding more to do even better. The next one is the human right to a healthy environment. This is perhaps the most important thing happening this decade in Scotland. There's a Human Rights Act which is going to, in some way, put into law the right for everyone to live in a healthy environment. And if it's done in the right way, it opens the door to legal action and changes in policy, which means every one of us can get the government to do the right thing on climate change and on the rest of the environment, and indeed on nature. So that's really important, but we need to get that right. Next, on the economy, there's quite a lot of talk about well-being economy and about the many measures of success that Scotland has, but when it comes down to the sharp end of the debate about the economy, it's usually about GDP. And the GDP of Israel is going to look great this year because they're spending lots of money, but it's not necessarily a good thing. So GDP is a really poor measure. It measures how much activity, but not whether it's good for anybody, not whether it's trashing the environment. So let's have a more sophisticated debate about how we measure the economy and make the discussion about a well-being economy. The public sector spends about £13 billion a year on services and on goods. That's from the NHS, local authorities, all of the public bodies, Scottish Government itself. That 13 billion can do bad by funding high carbon things and services, or it can do good by stimulating the right things. And so the public sector can really lead in the electric vehicle transition, for instance, by buying lots of those and creating the economies of scale that make them cheaper for other people, investing in charging networks, in making sure that their buildings, the buildings they control, are really energy efficient and powered by renewables. And on energy, we need to stop licensing more oil and gas. The UK government will tell you they have a climate compatibility checklist. So it asks, is it okay to extract this oil and gas for the climate? And when they ask that question, the answer is yes, but clearly the answer is no every time. And sadly, the Scottish government kind of clings to that too. They say, well, we're not as keen as the UK government, but there needs to be a climate test for any one of these things. So we need to get to the end. We need to set an end date. It's not tomorrow, it's not next week, it's not next year, but it's probably about 2030. So we need to say we will not be extracting any more oil and gas by that time, and we certainly won't be giving any more new licenses. And as we transition our system, as I mentioned before, one of our principles is a just transition, so that any worker working in the oil industry has a future in some other industry, which is a green industry. Any community that is heavily dependent on the oil industry, so much of the northeast, has a future when oil is gone. Transport, obviously another big sector. It's now the largest sector of emissions, and we need to depend less on cars and planes. That means more public transport, more walking, more cycling. So let's stop building new roads, because new roads encourage people to drive more. Let's give free bus travel, not just for young people, old people, disabled people, job seekers, asylum seekers. Let's give it to everybody. Because if you've got a card that gets you on the bus anywhere in Scotland free, why would you drive? You would only drive when you really, really, really needed to drive. Why would you even have a car if you've got such access to free transport? That's a very quick run through, a small number of the policies. Let's remember that we have public support. This is the 2019 March, just before the last Climate Act, second Climate Act. There's a lot of goodwill out there, and there's a big opportunity. Even if it's delayed to the spring, the Climate Change Plan is the place where the government can put lots of these things in, and we can start to make the really big difference that we need to. Thank you.
I am certainly not here as somebody who is any kind of expert in climate justice. I've been adopted by SCCS, which I very much appreciate because they're a fantastic bunch of people. But the work that I've been doing with them is about public engagement. It's about communications, it's about storytelling, it's about getting people on board. And I wanted to talk to you about where we are, not just within climate campaigning, but as a sector, as a civic society and third sector within Scotland and influencing across the UK. We live in a space currently with increasing levels of poverty and inequality. We're moving between crises, whether that's the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and the growing climate crisis. As a consequence of that, it has become harder to have your voice heard on the multiple issues that require change. The delivery of change, the delivery of being able to influence radical system change has actually become increasingly more difficult in the work that we do. Now, there's a whole range of those reasons. One of them is about having hostile governments. It is about having a hostile government at UK level that is not necessarily, and I say this, and everything I say is a personal opinion. I should put that in an asterisk in the slides. This does not reflect the views of SCCS. I'm an independent person. We have a hostile government at UK level. That's not a surprise to anybody that's in this room. Across the things that I work on, and I've worked on migrants and asylum seekers' rights, I've worked on equality, anti-racism, feminism, and I'm doing climate justice work with SCCS. I have encountered that hostility time and time again. What that means is that, along with rising populism, rising inequality, means that even small wins or targets are not just moving forward, but falling behind. And we've seen that with Rishi Sunak's response to net zero of late. We also are surrounded by disinformation campaigns who are campaigning better than what we are. Okay, and we've got to be really honest and clear about that. Now, Mike mentioned politics. I believe that the third sector and civic society should be unapologetically political, because the political is personal. There's nothing we're doing here that's not political. And there's a little bit of political space that needs to be reclaimed by civic society, including climate justice. What has happened is the conflation of charities and boundaries that charities must remain in. That has been conflated with activism, grassroots campaigning, and change making. You can do all of those things without being party political, because you are pursuing the mission, aims, purpose of your organisations. And we need to reclaim some of that back. We exist in a space of significant culture wars. You will have heard that phrase used multiple times. As somebody who has worked on migrants' rights and in particular, that has been happening for decades in that space. And the way in which it operates is by taking one disenfranchised group, one marginalised community, and pitching them against another marginalised community, so that the disagreement exists on the ground, as opposed to the disagreement being with the decision makers, those with access to power, opportunity, and wealth. We've seen the same thing happen in climate justice. We've seen that if you look at the conversations around low emission zones and ULEZ. And one of the stories that was told around that time was, let's think about what impact this is having on the poor nurse trying to get to her night shift across the city centre. Now, if we were genuinely thinking about the poor nurse trying to get to her night shift, there'd be significant policy change in lots of different spaces, including employment. But in particular, we know that those who are from working class communities are more likely to live in high populated urban areas with poor air quality and with higher levels of air pollution, and are less likely to have a car and are more likely to be using public transport. But the storytelling is very effective to create climate justice as an enemy, as a problem, and to create a disenfranchised, marginalised group as the people that it is against. We as a sector, whether we're talking about any type of inequality and injustice, need to have a better response to those types of disinformation campaigns. And one of the things that we need to get better at is how we define what campaigning is. So the work that I've been doing with SCCS included a workshop where I talked to members of SCCS as kindly as I could, whilst also telling them they've been doing some things wrong. They were very nice about it, which I very appreciate. But what I meant by that was actually the third sector as a whole. And I say this as somebody who's been in it and has made these mistakes. I have done these things. They have not produced good results, and that's why I'm doing things differently now. One of the things we have to move away from is the idea that campaigning, and we talked about, Mike mentioned the fact that it was a dirty word. It has been made a dirty word, but it's been made a dirty word by the people who were trying to push for change. So there's a little bit of reclaiming that needs to happen with that. But one of the things about campaigning is it's not a photo opportunity. It's not a one-off event. It's not a series of posts on Twitter with a hashtag. And I understand that that is sometimes what we want to define campaigning as, but campaigning is movement building. Campaigning is joining communities together for a cause. Campaigning is having a set of actions and a political purpose that you're trying to create change with. Often we've become quite comfortable with the photo opportunity as the campaign, and we can't afford for that to be the case. And now a lot of that is because we are low on resource. A lot of that is because we are responding to increasing inequality and poverty, so we're having to do frontline service delivery, and we're having to respond to what I would refer to as state failure. We're having to respond to that, which is taking us away from strategic system change, campaigning and delivery at that level. Those things are, of course, those things are linked to one another. Rising poverty and inequality and the inability to have the resources to be able to pursue system change are, of course, linked to one another. They benefit others, they do not benefit us. So what do we need to do now that I've told you everything that's wrong? I'll break you down and build you back up, I promise. What we need to do is rapidly improve and invest in community organising. We need to talk to people more. I've lost count of the times that I've been asked to come along and speak, and I've asked in the room who here would refer to themselves as an anti-racist or an anti-racist ally, and everybody puts their hand up. Who here would refer to themselves as a feminist? Who here believes in radical power and redistribution and taxing of the wealth and making polluters pay, and hands go up. We can't afford to speak in an echo chamber. We have to have people in the room. Now, that doesn't mean that we do what I'm often asked to do, which is go on to the radio and talk to somebody who doesn't believe racism exists. Let's not do that. It's exhausting. Let's not do that. That's not journalism, that's false equivalence. It doesn't mean getting people in the room who do not believe climate change is real. It is talking to around about the 25% of the population that know that this is wrong, but don't know what they can do about it. That know that this is a problem, but don't know the political manoeuvres that are happening that prevent solutions being formed. We have to talk to those people who are concerned but appear uninterested. Okay? We have to move from apathy to action. We have to create spaces for climate education and literacy done in a way that is accessible without being patronising. We have to do this in a way that is creative. We have to do this in a way that feels like people have power and hope to create change. And we need to tell stories better. So the story of the nurse that can't get to her shift because of low emission zones, it's extraordinary, but it worked because it was talked about a lot. It's been used in Scotland too, working class communities who can't get somewhere that they need to get to because of low emission zones. We have to get better at telling the story on what is the climate change emergency for the exhausted worker on 0-hour contracts. What is the climate change emergency for the single parent who is skipping meals to allow their child to eat? We have to build those stories with people. We have to find creative ways to communicate those stories. And most importantly, we have to get those people with a microphone to tell the story themselves. The more we can do that, the more we will create sustainable change. And finally, a few things that I'm doing with SCCS, because they've been really proactive. If you're not a member of SCCS, you should be a member of SCCS. So I'll do a plug for you as well while I'm here, because they've been excellent. But quickly, sorry, right. One of the things that I'm doing with them is creating a political and public engagement strategy, and it's got 3 parts to it, which is about accountability of those who have created promises, global leadership, so the ability of Scotland to be a global leader on these things, and the universal experience of unfairness and poverty and how that links to climate justice. It's about wider engagement, it's about community participation, it's about accessible methods of engagement. And SCCS are taking that role, and they've been really enthusiastic about doing that. And what you hopefully will see in the couple of years to come, over the few months to come, is some of this in action. And I hope you'll all be involved in that too.
Hi everyone, I'm Lily Aisa, and I'm here today as a climate justice activist and an ecological storyteller with Climate 2025. Yeah, I'm the founder of MENA for Environment, which means Middle East and North Africans for Environment. And I'm passionate about political ecology and climate justice from an inner city perspective. Yep. I'm currently working with Youth Environmental Service to create green jobs for the most vulnerable and marginalised people in society. And I would say that is some of the most important work I do. So I view Scotland as quite a progressive country, ecologically and also socially. So Scotland has a huge capacity for both green energy and fossil fuel extraction. But I really commend the massive kind of leaps it's making in green energy. I'm also really inspired by the rewilding of Scotland. Scotland might become the first rewilded country, and I feel like that really speaks volumes about our capacity for change and to change the stories and turn things around. It really future-proofs the landscapes and tells us that we can change course and it's not too late. I'd say this is also very interlinked with the rise of regenerative agriculture and nature-based systems which benefit both society and the economy. So I'd say, as well as this, I believe the social and the ecological are very linked. So Scotland has been instrumental, especially compared to its more conservative neighbours, such as other EU members and the UK. So things like offering to accept refugees from Gaza and free tuition has really set it aside and showed that Scotland wants to lead and build a more humanitarian society. However, despite this, it's still a global north country operating through fossil fuel extraction. So, for all those who don't know, Rosebank is the largest undeveloped oil field in the North Sea. It would produce as much emissions as the world's 28 poorest countries. And it really shows that the kind of conflicted place we're in, where we're choosing between destructive systems of the past, which have historically built wealth, provided security, and the future which we desperately need for people. If projects like Rosebank go ahead after the UN General Secretary has said there can be absolutely no new oil and gas projects, there could be 1.5 billion refugees created by 2050. So I think it's really important to join up these causes. We are living in an era of polycrises, which can be very depressing. However, I think it provides a genuinely really exciting solution because opportunity for solutions because they are so interlinked and they're so interwoven, and absolutely everyone can be a part of this capacity building. So I would like to build on that question: what kind of Scotland do we want to live in? Do we want to build upon the old systems of destruction, fossil fuel extraction, inequalities, pillaging of the global south? Or do we want to move into a new era of leadership, green leadership, and a regenerative system? Regenerative systems prioritize care of people, care of the planet, and they fix the root causes of issues. So I think organizations, third sector organizations, can join up and communicate the intersections of climate justice to the people they serve. So I think it's really important that organizations for disability, for inequality, for refugees, for land justice, for food insecurity, all try and answer the question, how does climate change affect me? To people who may not be engaged. I think that is the absolute most important work that can be done right now. And a lot a great solution, I'd say, is a Green New Deal. So a Green New Deal, like the Youth Environmental Service, who are trying to pressure the SNP to include it in the manifesto, a Green New Deal would heal nature, it would help the youth mental health crisis, and it would also give a massive economic boost. And we just need it. We're tired. So yeah, I would really like to encourage us to move away from destructive systems and try and build regenerative systems in every capacity we can, because if Scotland does this, it will not only reach its climate targets, but it will also really model a new style of leadership and can hopefully inspire other global north countries to do the right thing and leave fossil fuels in the ground. Thank you.